Is Nikon failing? The reason I'm asking this is today Nikon announced a notice of recognition of extraordinary loss. Extraordinary loss sounds really scary. It's not actually as bad as it sounds. I'm going to cover that, as well as go over what led up to this and what Nikon can do to stay relevant and stay alive, at least what I think that they can do. Add your own thoughts in the comments down below. I'm interested to hear what other people think. First, if you're interested in broader Nikon history, we did a podcast on this. Go to sdp.io/Nikon history. We start in like 1917, 100 years ago. They're celebrating their 100th anniversary. We bring you through World War II, the occupation by the U.S. armies in Tokyo. They have an amazing and storied history. They've been around for a long time. I would also suggest watching this video at sdp.io/death, where I talk about recent changes in the camera industry brought about mostly by the introduction of smartphones. First, let's look at, this is a Google Trends showing how many people search for the term Nikon from 2004 up to the present day. And you can see it stays pretty steady up until like around 2011, 2012, and then it starts to really decline pretty steeply. Those holiday spikes get smaller and smaller as fewer and fewer people are shopping for cameras as Christmas presents. What could bring this about? Let's plot it against the success of Instagram. Instagram just kind of mirrors the overall trend to take pictures with your smartphone, share them instantly. That's something that traditional cameras haven't been able to address very quickly. You can see photography is huge. Cameras, traditional cameras, getting smaller and smaller. It's an interesting trend in the industry. Here's something that really accentuates the underlying problems. This is a review of a Nikon point-and-shoot camera, and the reviewer says, "My iPhone 7 blows it out of the water. Does not belong in the same room as the iPhone 7 Plus. I have no choice but to return it." That's a person who actually got as far as buying a Coolpix and then actually took it back because their iPhone 7 Plus, exactly like this, just worked better. And I can confirm, iPhone 7 Plus has an awesome camera, has 50 millimeter and a wide angle zoom. It's fantastic. I use it all the time. I would never recommend buying a Coolpix nowadays. And that's a big part of the problem with Nikon, but they also have problems with like their higher end cameras. Problem being when a lot of the times you need a certain amount of volume to make a company work. And so even if they're selling as many enthusiast cameras, but the consumer camera market disappears, that can mean doom for a company. Let's jump into January of 2016. At this point in history, more than a year ago, Nikon they're more forward-thinking than other companies like Canon, and they are acknowledging that the consumer camera industry is gone and that people are using smartphones more and more, and they know they need to do something to address it, so they make a couple of announcements, the biggest of which is Nikon SnapBridge. Along with the release of the Nikon D500, they announced SnapBridge, which is a wireless technology based around Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. It will use Bluetooth to automatically transfer images that you take from the camera over to your smartphone. Therefore, they completely bypass the ponderous process of firing up Wi-Fi on your camera and your phone and then manually selecting pictures and transferring them over. Or at least that's how it's supposed to work. When we reviewed the D500, which you're watching a clip from there, we found that SnapBridge worked fantastically. And little did I know that my success with SnapBridge was largely luck, because I liked it so much that I took the D500 on a couple of trips, planning for it to be my main camera, planning to be able to share my images immediately. And what I found was SnapBridge failed more than it succeeded. It's a huge pain. And this speaks to some underlying problems with Nikon as a company that we'll try to address. But just for all you people saying, Tony just doesn't know what he's doing, SnapBridge works great. The average review for the iPhone version of this Nikon SnapBridge app is 1.5 stars. And how many 1.5 star apps do you have installed on your phone? I know there's no way I would install any app that only had 1.5 stars. I would assume that it was seriously flawed. You can't go lower than 1 star. So really, it's only half a star. Like, you can't give something 0 stars. Read the reviews. They're appalling. So many people complaining that it just doesn't work. And though we didn't have any problems when we did the D500 review, somehow, as soon as we finished the review, all these problems started to come up. So it's a deeply flawed app, and it speaks to serious problems that Nikon is having as they transition from a 100-year-old hardware manufacturer to a more agile company that is taking on many software development processes. They need to make that transition. Nikon knows they need to make that transition, but they're not succeeding at it. Another announcement that they made in January of 2016, which is an even bigger failure, is the release of 3DL fixed lens cameras, what we might call point and shoot cameras. They're using the same basic format as their little mirrorless cameras with interchangeable lenses, except these have more permanent lenses that you can't replace. They range in price from $650 up to $1,000, which is a whole lot for a camera where you can't change the lens, meaning it has kind of limited use. And they kept putting back the release date. Originally, they were going to be released in the summer of 2016, which was 6 months is still kind of a long time to wait, but then they pushed it back a little further and a little further. And I mean, how long can you wait on a piece of technology? Like if you wait a year, that tech might not be worth the price that you pre-ordered it for. There might be new tech that you'd want to evaluate. Nikon today announced that they're not ever going to ship these cameras. They just canceled it. And it has a lot of people thinking, okay, clearly this is a terrible sign for Nikon. What, are they going under or something? Why would you cancel a product more than a year after you announced it? I don't see it that way. I see it differently. I think this is a good sign for Nikon. I think Nikon is doing something difficult. They're acknowledging that the product that they were released isn't going to be profitable, and they're pulling it back, even though that means that they're going to irritate some of their consumers. They're making the difficult choice that will hopefully lead to more success in the company. Fast forward a bit to September 2016. This is Photokina, the huge photo conference that happens every 2 years in Germany. Chelsea and I fly out to Germany in Photokina to see all the new stuff, but we schedule only one meeting with one camera manufacturer, and that's Nikon. We scheduled it well in advance before they'd made their announcements because we wanted to see the new Nikon D820, as well as whatever new cameras that they had. And oh my God, did we end up having an uncomfortable meeting with the Nikon rep in Germany, because they didn't announce a D820. They announced 3 Nikon key mission cameras that we could care about so little that we never made any video or bothered to review them. What Nikon revealed at Photokina was that they didn't make a single camera for enthusiasts, but rather decided to enter the action camera market, dominated mostly by GoPro for many years. Now, if you're watching me now and you follow GoPro, it's going to sound insane that a camera company at this point in history decided to go after GoPro. And here's why. Because here is GoPro's stock chart. You can see back in 2015, 2014, GoPro was doing great. Their stock price was up in the 60s. But if you look at their stock price now, it's below $9. So they've lost like 85% of the value of the entire company. It's plummeted. Here's why. Because it takes a while to develop a product, even like an action camera and a 360 camera. It takes a while. And I'm confident Nikon decided to do it when the stock was around there, when the stock was up high. And then, take some time to do some development. And they probably watched the entire action camera industry plummet while they had these products in development. And they didn't back out like they did with the DL. I'm sure that they're regretting that, though they had to bring something to Photokina. They couldn't just come there with nothing. So they came there with that. And they've also been a flop, not unlike SnapBridge. This is the reviews on Amazon for the Nikon Key Mission 360. It has 2 out of 5 stars. And again, you can't go below 1 star. So it's really, they're only getting 1 extra star above 0. They're 58% of the reviews are 1-star reviews. And that's out of 137 reviews. It's not like they only have 3 reviews. They have a lot of reviews, a lot of people who bought this camera and despised it. And indeed, when we had that uncomfortable meeting, we discovered that the video quality out of it was pretty appalling. So Nikon bravely entered a new market that they hoped would rescue the company and return it to profitability. But Key Mission was a failure. The other cameras do a little bit better here. The Key Mission 170, which is a direct GoPro Hero competitor, is at 2.8 stars. And the Key Mission 80, which is more like a body camera that like a security guard might wear, is rated at 3 stars. But people don't buy stuff with less than 4 stars on Amazon. There are only 3 ratings on Amazon, and that's 4 stars, 4.5 stars, and 5 stars. 5 stars means exceptional, assuming you have enough reviews that you know they aren't fake. 4.5 stars is kind of acceptable. And 4 stars is like, I better really investigate this before I buy it. But people don't, it's a not liked product. And again, one of the common things that we see people complaining about in these reviews is the flaws in Nikon SnapBridge. So it kind of ties in together. So when we look at the D500, we loved it. It's fantastic. Everybody has loved it. Same with the Nikon D5 that they released in 2016. Nikon also released a bunch of lenses in 2016. And those have been huge successes. But as they branch into new industries, sort of bravely trying to combat the failing consumer industry, we're seeing them struggling. They're not succeeding in their new ventures. And that actually gets to be pretty scary because they wouldn't be branching into these industries if they didn't really need it. So let's fast forward to November 2016. Nikon announced that they're restructuring. They're going to focus on profits, not revenue. Most businesses actually want to improve their top line, not their bottom line. Nikon it's a big shift to say profits, not revenue, because what it means is we're going to scale our whole business down. We hope to make more profits, but we're going to be a smaller company. And indeed, they decided to, through attrition, through kind of voluntary retirement, they were going to reduce their headcount by 1,000 people, or about 1,000 people. That's a nice way of laying people off. And they had some success with that, and they followed up in today's announcement. They managed to, through attrition, reduce headcount by 1,100 people and change. And that's nice. I as most American companies would just lay people off, but they're very thoughtful about it. As an American company, you lay people off, and that allows you to not fire people with cause, but it does allow you to pick the people who are the worst at the company and get rid of them. When you have something like a voluntary retirement, you actually tend to lose the highest quality employees because those are the people who are most readily able to find other jobs. It's the most lazy people who will pass on their voluntary retirement because they're kind of sitting around anyway. Nikon, of course, if they had a star employee, they could have said, no, we'll keep you around. Maybe they even gave bonuses to people to make sure that they stay. Companies can do that kind of thing. I've been through a couple massive layoffs in companies before. So I'm familiar with the different processes. I don't mean to say that Nikon lost all their good talent, but there are penalties to this kind of nice, sympathetic way of laying people off. So now we're in February 2017, and we get this notice of recognition of extraordinary loss. And it sounds very scary, but what it comes down to is, here's the chart that they provided. And what you'll see if you dig into this is that they had previously projected that they were going to lose a whole bunch of money, and they're revising those projections to say they're going to lose even more money than they originally expected. But at the same time, it's not necessarily bad news. Most of those losses are coming from their semiconductor lithography department. Yeah, I know, right? Nikon also, besides digital imaging equipment, they make these things that make semiconductors, kind of like little chips that you might put in electronics and things like that. And it's not something that people know much about. And it was a pretty small part of their business 5-10 years ago. It's a growing portion of the business. Mostly this business has been growing. The digital imaging, the camera department has been shrinking substantially. So it's become proportionally a bigger part of the business. Turns out it's not doing great, but that doesn't have anything to do with cameras. So they have a bunch of inventory that they just have to write off. I guess they weren't able to sell it, or there were some problems with it or something. So they had to just say, hey, we're taking all this big loss and we're doing it all at once. So that's most of what the extraordinary loss is. And in fact, you shouldn't read it as extraordinary loss, because that sounds like extraordinary disaster like a tsunami or something. Read it like extraordinary loss, like something out of the ordinary. It's more like a proper accounting term, but when you put it in a headline, it sounds like a proper disaster. It's an unusual one-time loss that they need to take. That sounds really scary, but isn't that bad. Now, the other part of that extraordinary loss was the voluntary retirement plan that they had. They said they'd lose about 1,000 people, and it ended up being like 1,160, somewhere in that range. So they did end up letting more people go than they had originally planned. But again, that's kind of a good thing, because while they have to maybe give these people some bonuses, they have to pay them some amount of money to be able to leave on a friendly basis instead of just laying them off. They no longer have that on their books, so they don't have to keep paying that person over time. So their overall ongoing expenses will drop. And that means the company is going to be able to be profitable easier because their expenses are lower. So even if they make the same amount of money, their expenses go down, they can return to profitability. But as a result of this extraordinary loss, their profits are way down. In 2015, their profits were down from the previous year, but I calculated it at about 161 million US dollars. Of course, they report in yen. In 2016, their profits are going to be almost negative $80 million. So that's a big and scary jump. But again, a lot of that is extraordinary losses that we shouldn't expect to see in the future. And in fact, Nikon seems to have quite a bit of cash on hand. So I don't think they're going to have any problem weathering this and moving forward. So Nikon is okay. Despite what you might read, they're going to be okay. But I would like to talk about what's next for Nikon, what they can do to improve things. And I'd like to open it up in the comment section, have you write what you think they should be doing, what would make you happy. And people tend to address that very selfishly. They tend to I want Nikon to make a camera that's 20 frames per second and costs $600, so they should do that. But think about what could actually make the company profitable, what makes business sense for them. First, let's talk about their actual camera bodies. One thing I'd like to see them do is to improve the camera screens. And the reason for this is the screens on the back have been okay. But if you hold it up against your smartphone, they're dim, low resolution, and not very responsive. And nowadays, every one of us has a smartphone. And therefore, the way we judge touchscreens and LCD screens in general is based on our experience with our smartphone. So anything that doesn't match that feels crappy and kind of old and cheap. So it's weird to buy a $3,000 camera and have the screen be so bad. We were really struck by that on the Nikon D5 when I could read my Samsung S5 screen in sunlight, but not my $6,500 sports camera. Another thing they really need to do is to get sensor stabilization technologies in here. Sony, Olympus, Panasonic, Pentax all build in sensor stabilization technologies, and our real-world experience with it is that it is fantastic. It lets you use any lens, even unstabilized lenses, and handhold it for ridiculous amounts of time. And it can be better at stabilizing because it can cancel out that shutter shake that twists your camera like that. That's something that a lens stabilization can't do. Sensor stabilization also enables a bunch of software-based technologies like auto horizon leveling, which is an amazing feature in a landscape camera. Please, Nikon, give us sensor stabilization. As a side effect, in the lens design process, it means you don't have to build image stabilization into the lenses, which can actually reduce cost and improve image quality. And if you don't believe me, compare the Nikon 24-70 f2.8 without VR versus the new version with vibration reduction image stabilization. The new version is more expensive and less sharp. And it's because they had to add in extra complexity and extra elements to make lens stabilization work instead of just building it into the camera where it should be. I also really want to see Nikon, they can be SLRs, they don't have to be mirrorless, so I wouldn't mind it if they were mirrorless, cameras with electronic viewfinders. As somebody who switches from mirrorless cameras to DSLRs, the single hardest part is realizing that when I look through the viewfinder, I don't get what I see. It's very easy with a DSLR to take a bunch of pictures that are all overexposed or underexposed and not realize it until you chimp. But when you shoot it with a mirrorless camera in the viewfinder, you see exactly what you're going to get, and you can get a histogram. That is so valuable. That means that you get shots that you otherwise miss. It makes a real difference. It also means no chimping. So you don't miss the next moment while you're looking and reviewing your pictures. You're always ready to shoot again. Their latest cameras, the D500 and the D5, do have 4K, but they have 4K with a severe crop factor. And that is a real penalty. If you're buying a full frame camera with 4K, you want to be able to take advantage of those full frame lenses. You want to get that nice background blur and bokeh. But the way they've implemented it today, they take it 1 pixel at a time, so they're reading from a very small part of the sensor. It also means that when they offer high resolution sensors, like hopefully in the D820, it means that the crop factor is going to get more and more and more, kind of like we saw in the Canon 5D Mark IV. So they need to work out how to read all that data, even if they need to skip lines, whatever it is, to read from the full sensor. Nikon is really behind Canon when it comes to video focusing, phase detect, autofocus on the sensor. So when you have it in video mode and you try to focus with a Nikon, it's clumsy and slow and awkward. You could never include in any professional video the process of refocusing because it would look terrible. If you do that with a Canon or a Sony or even a Panasonic, those all transition focus nice and smoothly. That's something that Nikon really needs to work on, whether they handle it in hardware or software. I also think Nikon cameras should be cooler. I don't know what it is with both Canon and Nikon where like they designed an SLR in 1985 and then just stuck with that same design, like all black, 80s LCD screen on top. Go back a little more retro. Give us cameras like these. You tried to do that with the Nikon DF and that wasn't all that successful, but don't give up making cool cameras. The cool factor matters. It really does, especially with the upcoming group of people who will undoubtedly love photography from using Snapchat and Instagram and using their smartphone, but want something that's more capable. If the camera doesn't look like a dorky tourist camera from the 1980s, I promise they're going to be more likely to buy it and use it. Make them accessories. Let's talk about what Nikon can do in the lenses. Now here, Nikon is actually kicking butt. The 105 f1.4 is a fantastic lens. That 200 to 500 is a wonderful lens. Nikon has had a lot of great lenses this year. So in that respect, I feel like they've been really successful and they should keep doing what they're doing. The one thing I'd like to see is some pro quality APS-C lenses, because right now they have a lot of pro quality lenses, but they're all full frame lenses. And a lot of people will put those full frame lenses on their APS-C bodies, but in our real world experience, our testing and third party objective data verifies this, you get much less sharp images when you put a full frame lens on a APS-C body. And if you don't believe me, visit stp.io/ffcrop, where I have a whole video that walks you through all that data. So what I want to see are Nikon equivalents to the Sigma 18 to 35 f1.8 and the Sigma 50 to 100 f1.8, maybe even extend those focal lengths a little bit. And of course, fix the focusing problems, which you should be able to do. That will give us great pro-grade lenses for great bodies like the D500 and allow the D500 to really be a do-it-all sports, wedding, and portrait body. Right now, because we have to slap full-frame bodies on that, we're making a pretty big sacrifice. Let's talk about what Nikon needs to do with hiring. I'm going to talk about software. But the first thing they need to do is to hire the right people. And it's clear to me they don't have the right people working on software components like Nikon SnapBridge, nor do they have the right people building the operating systems and user interfaces for their cameras, because those are pretty appalling. Nikon needs to find some talented people who have already made smartphone apps, who have experience working on small operating systems for devices like this, and they need people who have user interface design experience, because the user interfaces on these things are appalling, absolutely appalling. Again, we now all have the point of reference of using an iPhone or your Android phone where they have these incredible, intuitive touch interfaces. The Nikon interface where you use the D-pad and you go back and forth through like page after page after page of menu. You cannot search settings. If you're looking for a particular setting, you just have to flip through page after page after page. Why can you not search it? You can't do it. All these basic user interface things that we come to rely on don't exist, and it's because they don't have the right people. You need good people doing that software stuff. So find some tech companies and steal their best guys and give them some autonomy. Let them operate a little bit separately from all the old 100-year-old hardware processes that you have, and let them show you how to do agile and continuous development. That's going to be key to success in Nikon in the future. The first thing that those people need to do is to fix SnapBridge. They have to fix it. It's appalling right now, but you can't just release it and move on. I know that's what you do with every camera. That's what you did with the D810. There haven't been any new updates to it. SnapBridge is really broken, and people expect updates with their software. Even when we reviewed the D500 with SnapBridge, I thought, it's not perfect, but it's an iPhone app. They're going to release some new versions of it. So any little problems, I'm sure they'll fix it. They didn't fix it. They just released it and they moved on with their life. But that's not how the software world works. You go back, you listen to consumers, you look at every problem that people are having, and you make sure that it doesn't happen. You test it with every different smartphone out there in lots of different conditions. You test it in the real world. What if people have a wallet in their pocket and it might be interfering with the Bluetooth signal a little bit? How do you notify them that there are problems happening? How do you overcome those problems and keep that connection persistent despite intermittent connectivity? You have a massive amount of work to do with SnapBridge, but you need to do it. And all those cameras that you released in 2016 that support SnapBridge, you got to get them working perfectly and get that SnapBridge rating up from 1.5 stars to at least 4 stars. All right. You also need to work on the on-camera software. You need to toss that old OS and come up with a new operating system, an entirely new touch interface. It needs to work intuitively with touch. That means things like on-screen keyboards need to work well. That means you need to be able to search your settings. You need to be able to swipe up and down through things. There's plenty of models out there for how to do things right. Look at any really popular smartphone app and you'll see how it should work. Stop building the exact same user interface that you've built since the very first SLR. Toss it and move on. As part of that, you need to be releasing frequent updates for it. And that requires a change in your processes too. Just like most car manufacturers, camera manufacturers build something once, they get it as close to perfect as possible, and then they ship it, and then they just start moving on to the next thing. Maybe they release a new lens, and then they have to release a small firmware update to make the camera work with that new lens. But they never add a new feature to it. Well, some companies do. Fuji does. Fuji's been great about this. Fuji pushed out so many updates to the X-T1 that we had to pull our review of the first X-T1 because all those firmware updates fixed almost every problem that we had with them. Fuji's a good role model for you here. And look at the enthusiasm of Fujifilm owners. They're so enthusiastic about their cameras. I'll also point to Tesla, a car manufacturer who changed the way things work. Cars for a long time used the same model as cameras where they released one, and then if you wanted a tiny little software update, you bought a whole new car. Tesla changed that. They released free over-the-air updates. And if you look at the community of Tesla owners, people are enthusiastic about that. It's exciting to get new features. Build a model into your cameras where you can release new features and then aggressively go after it. I want to talk about some of the software-based updates that Nikon could release for their cameras. Other camera manufacturers could do this too. I almost feel like Canon isn't listening because at least Nikon is trying. Canon isn't even trying. So I'm actually more worried about Canon. Any of you, here are some things you can do. Silent shutter. So tremendously useful to those of us who do street photography or photojournalism, wedding photography, shooting in a church, wildlife photography, where you're shooting up close to the birds. The sound of the shutter is disturbing in all those environments. All mirrorless cameras pretty much offer a silent shutter. It's entirely possible with DSLRs. They do have an electronic shutter. You have to keep the mirror open, of course, but you could be using the back screen and still shoot silently, but they don't. Just implement electronic shutters and silent shutter. The hardware is there. You just need a software update. I'd also like to see image averaging used to enable specifically low ISOs in camera. With image averaging, you could use the electronic shutter to snap a series of pictures with almost zero delay between those images being captured, and then add them together. Just literally stack them on top of each other by averaging it. That would allow you through software to perfectly achieve low ISO, such as ISO 25, ISO 10, ISO 1. And what that would allow you to do is to get really long shutter speeds without having to add a neutral density filter. It's a really simple thing that any camera could do, and for some reason, nobody's done it. Nikon, if you do these things, people will be so excited about the cameras. I know you might not make a lot of money right away by giving out free updates, but you will build a community of enthusiasts. Look at what Magic Lantern did for Canon, and look at that Magic Lantern community and how enthusiastic they are. Image stacking is another option. Now, Olympus has been really good about implementing different technologies for image stacking, as are several other companies, but you can do things like focus stacking and use image stacking techniques in different ways. But it's well established that other companies are doing that already. Just tear out a page from their book. Something that Pentax does, which is incredibly useful, is auto-leveling the horizon. I mentioned it earlier. If you build a stabilized sensor, that little tilt that you always have in there, you can fix it. Your pictures will just be level. That results in higher resolution images because you don't have to crop it when you go back later and rotate it. Also, it's shocking to see that these DSLRs don't have eye autofocus in them. Typically, they'll have some sort of face autofocus when you're using live view. But if you use eye autofocus in like the Sony a7R II or the Sony a6500, it works so well for portraiture because you don't have to be moving the thumbstick and trying to put the focusing point right on the person's eye. You can just, wherever their eye is, it will automatically find the nearest eye and focus on it. And it makes the portrait workflow move so much faster, and it's so much more precise and accurate. Somehow they've completely overlooked this obvious feature that their target audience would absolutely love. It works. You kind of need an EVF with it too, though, since you're probably going to be using the viewfinder. And this is a big one. This one is going to require replacing the entire operating system and at least a year of work. But we really need to see third-party apps implemented so that we can let other developers come up with creative ideas. And again, where can you find a good role model for this? In the smartphone. Look at how incredibly popular various photography apps have been and how those things have changed photography. Look at the Google Pixel, look at the iPhone. There are amazing things that you can do when you let creative people do what they want with your hardware. And yeah, I know you're thinking, oh, but what if somebody wrote this app that did something bad? You can curate the app. You can build walled gardens that help control all of that. Anyway, third-party apps are going to set one of these companies apart from the others. I know Sony kind of has this, but their apps, the way they're implemented are really clumsy, and they don't allow just anybody to submit those apps. This is a minor thing, but in the D3400 series, bracketing, give me bracketing. Can you believe they don't put bracketing in those cameras? That's something that I absolutely hate, when they hold back very simple software features to try to push people to the higher level cameras. You need to stop that practice entirely. Give away as much as possible in every single camera because you want people to love your cameras. People are going to upgrade from the D3000 series because they want a flip screen or something, not because they need bracketing. I'm also going to make the suggestion that Nikon pare down their camera selection a little bit. I'd love for them to lose the Nikon 3000 series. They don't need that 3400 anymore. I think that the 5600 is a better entry-level camera. The 3400 is almost frustrating with its kind of weak focusing system and, you know, a lack of a flippy screen, which seems like a necessity. I think you could also drop the D7200. I know that's a popular camera, but I like the D500 so much more. I would also suggest making the D610 or whatever the successor is, the D620, trying to get that down to a $1,000 price point. I think the market opportunity for a $1,000 full frame camera will be huge, especially for landscape photographers, and that'll pull a lot of people into your system. I know I said I wanted cooler cameras, but I think the Nikon DF in the full frame world could also go, and instead just make all your cameras a little bit cooler. In summary, is Nikon failing? No, I don't think so. I think Nikon is struggling, but they're in a period of transition. which actually gives them a big advantage over Canon, who seems to just keep plowing on doing the exact same thing. I have a lot of hope for Nikon. I know I threw out a bunch of random thoughts that I have, and I don't have nearly the information to know whether those can be successful, because only the people at Nikon really know the intricacies of how they work and what they can and can't do. So take my suggestions as just some advice from a stranger that I hope will help. And again, if you're watching this, I'd love to see your suggestions for what Nikon can do to improve things. Avoid the thing where you just start to pick holes in what I suggested, like that won't work because of battery power, or that won't work because of whatever. No, be positive, think about what can work and what should be done. Subscribe for more videos. Thanks, bye.